Ambassador Miceli, thank you so much for coming to the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center today.
Thank you for inviting me.
We had a chance to meet last year, and I really appreciate you coming in to talk with us today. I was just wondering if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your goals while you're here in Washington, D.C. representing Malta.
Well, our goals on a bilateral basis are essentially twofold, or threefold in fact. One is to obtain the visa waiver, which we've obtained. Two was to complete the double taxation agreement, which we have just obtained. And three is basically to attract business investment from America to Malta.
Could you tell me a little bit about the visa waiver that you mentioned? Is that for tourism, business?
The visa waiver is essentially, it is a reciprocation of a waiver which we had already granted several years back to Americans to be able to come to Malta without the requirement of a visa. We were the only country, well, one of the few countries outstanding at the time from Europe which did not have a visa waiver.
I see.
And on the basis of I suppose, the security of the system in Malta and the fact that Maltese had a very good reputation, we obtained that. I think it was one of the last acts that President Bush signed.
And you had mentioned a taxation treaty. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Taxation avoidance treaty. Basically, it is a way of avoiding that either Americans who vest in Malta or vice versa, Maltese who vest in North America, pay tax twice. According to this agreement, there is a common tax tariff which they pay taxes, which would be shared equally by both countries. And that is all based on the question of transparency of the system. And therefore, as a result, the Maltese system we had to pass several acts in Parliament to ensure that our system conformed, one, with the international system, and also satisfied the Treasury.
And you had talked a little bit about foreign investment into Malta.
Yes.
In terms of total foreign investment into Malta, is the U.S. a major player in that area?
The U.S. is not a major player, but we are hoping that thanks to this double taxation avoidance agreement, it will become so.
You know, the U.S. and Malta are trading partners.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of goods Malta imports from the U.S. and what type of goods Malta exports to the U.S.?
In terms of imports, essentially, we have over time imported aircraft, obviously, and heavy machinery. In terms of exports, it's basically in the semiconductor field. Okay. So basically computers. We have large companies operating there.
Yeah.
On that point of view. Yes.
Malta is in a very strategic location, nestled in the middle of the Mediterranean. Can you tell us a little bit about how this strategic location has assisted the economy in Malta?
Well, basically, we have always promoted ourselves as being a bridge between Europe, of which we are, as you know, the European Union, of which we are a member, and North Africa. We are 60 miles south of Sicily. We're 180 miles north of North Africa. And therefore, we propose that investors should come to Malta basically on three aspects. One, because of Malta's investment potential, more specifically in services, high value-added services, which would include basically financial, tourism, health, education, and also business and technology parks. The other reason why they would come to Malta is basically as a base for those American employees and executives who are currently operating in North Africa. Malta is a safe and comfortable base in which they can set up their residences and can also educate their children. I suppose the third one is basically people who come there on holiday. All right, we offer a tremendous opportunity for people to come and enjoy themselves. They have 7,500 years of history, which they can experience in the short space of 10 days.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned tourism and the long history Malta has of attracting tourists. Yeah. Where are most of the tourists coming from?
Presently, they're coming from Europe, Northern Europe in particular. But progressively, they're beginning to come from, at least via cruise liner tourism, from North America.
Okay.
And that is, it's very good because it gives us the opportunity of, one, whetting the appetite for North Americans to come there as a permanent destination, or as a destination as opposed to just a passing through type of tourism like cruise liner tourism.
So now I've read that Malta has one of the largest fleets for shipping of any country in the world. I'm just wondering what comparative advantages have led Malta to develop such a large fleet?
I believe it's the level of service, what we call over here 24/7 type of level of service. Everybody's within easy reach, and the people are actually contactable, and you can actually speak to them personally. Because otherwise, in terms of fiscal incentives and registration rates, I suppose we're as competitive as any other country.
Does the geography figure in? Is it a place where ships can also stop, rest, and then continue on to the next port because of that location?
I would say so. That is the sort of the concept of the hub is fast catching hold. Yes.
Within the EU, what sort of challenges does Malta face multilaterally?
Within the EU, the major challenges would be those of basically taking advantage of our comparative advantages. It's very easy for some countries to think that we might be competitive to them. But what we try and show is also where we are complementary with them. To give you an example, we're at the southern end of Europe, and at the same time, we are in tourism, but we look upon, for example, the Baltic states as being complementary rather than competitive. Why? Because it is in their interest to come and visit a place like Malta when their countries are right in the heart of winter, when it's extremely cold, and they can find in Malta very comfortable winters. On the other hand, Maltese could very much enjoy going to the Baltic states in summer, when for them they find a relatively cool environment.
Now, as you look out 5 or 10 years into the horizon, in the relatively short term, what industry sectors do you expect would have the greatest growth? Would it be tourism or trade shows, shipping, medical equipment, or something else?
Well, we're essentially concentrating on certain key sectors. One is financial, specialized financial service, basically mostly financial service. There would tend to be services, okay? We're talking about specialized financial services, tourism, health, education, business and technology parks, and also ship registration.
What impact has the recent downturn in the economy had on Malta?
Thankfully, not so great, because we are fortunate in so far that the solidity of the banks and the stability of the currency, which at that time was the euro, enabled us to absorb most of the impact. I would say, in terms of the actual effect, the negative effect was not half, in fact, as severe as it would have been for the average EU country. From what I know, our unemployment peaked about 6.9%, whereas it was, at least at the end of, I believe, the mid-2010, it was about 9.6% for the whole of Europe. Our GDP contraction was, I believe, in the region of 2.1%, whereas for the whole of Europe it averaged about 4.1%. So relatively speaking, we are quite secure there. It doesn't mean we can't work more, doesn't mean we can't do better. Another reason why I believe we managed to absorb that impact was because we had already started moving out of, shall we say, the structurally unsound sectors of the economy into the current sectors, which are basically the high value added services which I mentioned to you earlier.
So the housing sector never had a big dip the way it did in the US and in parts of Europe?
I think the housing sector is beyond compare, for the simple reason that everybody owns a house in Malta. And because the banking sector is so stable, everybody, first of all, the bank requires a substantial amount of down payment before you even buy a house. And besides which, everybody knows everybody else. So if there's somebody who is not exactly reliable enough, he wouldn't get a loan in the first place.
And that's a great point. Can you tell us a little bit about the size of Malta? That's something we haven't touched on yet.
The size of Malta, the actual size is 121 square miles, which, as you can imagine, is not very big. The population is 400,000, which is not insignificant. We don't have any precious metals or precious stones. What we have is hardworking people. And much of that hard work, I would have to say, is the result of several years of domination by different Europeans. The most beneficial, and it's still a moot point, but the most beneficial, I would say, was the British domination, which besides giving us a strict discipline, you will find, for example, in all of the barracks, you will always find a clock tower. It seems to mean something. And so forth. Then Mediterranean most probably is very, very important. And you will find that the Maltese stop at pedestrian crosses automatically. Traffic lights, they keep queues, or what we call here lineups. We even consume tea more than coffee. So the British has given us something, but the most important thing they have given us is the English language.
In terms of the primary language in Malta, is the primary language English?
The primary language is English. We have inherited a language which was given to us by the Phoenicians in the 2nd millennium BC, which is a language which originated in Lebanon, but reached us via the most successful Phoenician colony, which was Carthage. And it is Semitic, but it's written in Roman script. It has a predominance of Italian words, and it's pronounced very European-like.